Welcome to Cryptoland. I'm Krishna Andavolu. Today we're talking about how sex workers have turned to crypto after being cut off by banks, Visa, and MasterCard. From Spank Chain to Cum Rocket, sex workers and adult content creators are innovating on the blockchain. But this tech pioneering is a product of necessity and has thrown sex workers into the wild world of cryptocurrency startups and investing. Here to get into it are Motherboard Sam Cole and writer and sex worker Liara Roux. Thank you both for joining me today. I want to get into a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to get into, but I think we should set the table on a couple things. The first is like the actual landscape of sex work, adult content creation, how payment systems work, where the intersection of crypto comes into, because it's a maze. And I think for the uninitiated, it might be kind of confusing to just jump right in. And then the first thing I want to get through is just like kind of a values conversation. Like I think when people think about sex work or adult content, there can be a moralistic layer on top of that. And I want to say like that's gone from my perspective. I think like the consenting adults transacting with one another equals always been fine, regardless of what the legal structures are. However, that framework also is on top of like the sexism, misogyny, racism, all of these issues of power imbalances that exist in the world. And what's cool is that like the idealism of an enlightened sex work and the idealism of a crypto blockchain world both kind of disrupt those problematic power structures. Sorry, that was a little bit of like sophomore seminar in Berkeley, but I just want to get that as like kind of a table setting. First of all, what do you guys think of that? Does that make sense to you?
I think most people these days realize that sex workers are just like anyone else and just want to do their job. So I appreciate that you're acknowledging that, putting it out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the sex work community and the cryptocurrency community have a lot in common. It's two groups that are looking for ways to disrupt, like you said, those power structures. It's people who are rejecting the way that things have always been, and who are looking for new ways to build something ideally better. So yeah, I think that's spot on.
That's where we are. Okay, so let's talk then about the landscape of sex work and adult content creation today, how it's paid for, what the usual pathways are, because it goes everywhere from like watching shit on Pornhub to, calling someone and having an escort or a date with someone, right? And paying for that. So let's go through all of them one by one. Where should we start, do you guys think?
God, I mean, do you have 100 years to spend?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 5 years, I guess we've seen this really big resurgence or this big boom in adult content creators who are working for themselves. So that's the most recent history that we have is, we have platforms like OnlyFans, MyFreeCams, things like that, where people are owning their work and creating something for themselves. Before that, we had, the studio system where people were shooting porn as porn stars. You had the very big famous stars who were on the VHS boxes, and that's what sold the films. But they were working for a production company, a studio, and that's who owned the work. Since the 60s to today, we have this big change where people are really taking control of their own livelihoods. And then in the very near future, which is what we're here to talk about, that's kind of under fire, under threat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, it's really great that people have more individual ownership over their careers, but it is also, in a way, almost tied in with the gig economy. OnlyFans in some ways is a lot like an Uber to sex workers, and while it's great that people have that platform and can work for themselves, as OnlyFans tries to balance the demands of credit card companies and their banking partners, often sex workers are the ones who are suffering from these draconian policies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you have to be everything when you're working for yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be the accountant, you have to be the marketing professional, you have to be a social media manager, on top of being the model and the person who shows up and is smiling and happy to see everyone. And
yeah.
It's just, it's more than a full-time job. It's 5 full-time jobs, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're talking sort of about people who make content on a platform like OnlyFans, who are able to then offer services like private videos or public videos or individualized videos. That's like one vector of this interaction.
The industry as a whole is a lot less separation between different types of sex workers. You know, there used to be strippers, porn stars, cam girls, and escorts, and dominatrixes. Now, people really run in a bunch of different circles. A lot of escorts have started OnlyFans, so they're doing porn now. A lot of cam girls will see clients in person. It's this really cool blurring of the lines, and it's brought a lot of different communities together, which has made sex workers as a whole a lot more powerful as a block.
Interesting. I didn't really, and that's kind of like facilitated by technological platforms, right?
Absolutely.
So if you were an escort in 1970, whatever, you might have the back pages, word of mouth, walking around. These were like your marketing opportunities. Now you could set up an OnlyFans, have an Amazon wish list. I mean, any number of different ways of going about it, right? And that the content then is in the hands of the creator, and then these platforms are the proliferation devices.
Exactly. A lot of people are on social media now. I think just about every sex worker who has access to online and is even just moderately tech savvy is going to have multiple social media accounts and multiple revenue streams, which in a lot of ways is really, it's more work, but it also means that they're less vulnerable to one form of work getting shut down.
And that there's a new intermediary then between the sex worker and the client. And it's not like a pimp like it may have been in years past, but it is a sprawling network of, technological solutions to a very basic concept, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of tension between the technology providers and the sex workers. They often take really high cuts. OnlyFans only takes 20%, which is incredibly low. A lot of platforms take 40 to 50%.
Wow, that's a lot.
Which when you think about it, it's crazy.
And so the pricing then for OnlyFans is if you want a private video, maybe that's like $1,000. And then, I mean, obviously it depends, but then...
It depends on your level of fame, whether it's a custom video. It's about volume too. If you have thousands of subscribers and you send out a $5 video, if 1,000 people buy it, that's $5,000. So that could make sense more than selling one video for $1,000.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that is just so many options in the hands of the creator.
Yep.
But then the issue is payment, right?
Absolutely.
So take me through those problems, because yes, there is now this sprawling network of ways that content creators and escorts can do business, market themselves, make money, but then the actual handing of cash back and forth has this intermediary from credit card companies to a PayPal, through an OnlyFans, et cetera. So take me through that. What have been the recent problems? Because I remember hearing about OnlyFans no longer supporting adult content creators, and I was like, okay, so who's left?
Exactly.
That's a very good question.
And that's all, from what I understand, because credit card companies don't want to get mired in whatever.
Yeah. I mean, payment processors being hostile toward sex workers is a problem that's been going on since, almost the beginning of the internet, which ironically, sex workers, were the first ones to adopt a lot of these platforms like PayPal and the online payment systems. A lot of them were built to facilitate selling porn. But yeah, like you said, in recent history, and it's gotten so much more worse. It feels like the walls are closing in for a lot of people where, all of these platforms have these terms of service that say you can't say all these specific words that might be construed as people meeting up. And this is all coming from pressure from organizations and payment processors who are afraid of this moral panic about sex work, and specifically about sex trafficking. There's a lot of accusations that sex trafficking is happening on a lot of these platforms. A lot of it is really baseless. So it's a lot of this panic. Banks don't want to be seen as, being high risk. That's a category that porn is high risk because it has this stigma attached to it. They start dropping platforms after the pressure gets to be too much. We saw Visa and MasterCard and I think Discover drop Pornhub in late 2020. And they stopped payments through them completely after these big exposés came out where it was saying Pornhub has got all of this child porn on it, which is not true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad shit on the internet in general, but they go after specifically porn platforms. And those payment processors haven't come back to Pornhub, even though the platform revamped
Oh, wow.
its entire, safety and security systems. So yeah, just to bring us up to recent days, like OnlyFans kind of had the same thing happen where they were saying, we're going to get rid of all not safe for work stuff because the pressure just got to be too much from banks. And there was a big outcry on Twitter and elsewhere, there were protests. And then about 4 or 5 days later, OnlyFans was like, oh, actually, we figured it out. Everyone come back.
Yeah.
But by then, it was like the damage is done.
Yeah.
They really broke their trust with the sex working community after they did that. And I think they may very well have been told by their banks that they had to do this. I think, maybe the banks saw that the tide is turning a little bit. I think all of the media coverage that the sex workers' rights movement got after the OnlyFans ban happened, I think it's very similar to gay rights movement, maybe in the 90s, where people were starting to realize that a lot of people that they know are sex workers, like, oh, these aren't just imaginary people that are like disgusting and terrible, like they're people in society that, have chosen this line of work for whatever reason, but it doesn't mean that they need to be completely banished from everywhere.
Or even more specifically, like in the transactional landscape of what happens in sex work, like protecting the labor is something that's a moral imperative, right? Like
Absolutely.
we talk about moralistic stuff, but the moral imperative is like, if you're involved in a transaction, we should make sure that the power isn't completely with the person who's paying, and especially when it is in places where it's illegal, that's where the stuff that we can call bad might happen, is that power imbalance, where someone can be like, yo, what you're doing is illegal, so you better like pay up, you better whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of realizing now that sex workers' rights are a labor issue, just like, Uber strikes and things like that. Now that everyone is in this gig economy, it's not right and it's unfair to kick people off of these platforms that everyone else uses.
Right.
So yeah, it's a huge labor issue, and there's a big push to kind of see it as such, not as this other separate dirty thing.
So picking up on one thing you said, Sam, is that credit card companies don't support Pornhub, which means that's a huge opening for cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? Does that mean that like if you go on Pornhub now and you want to do a paid video or something or buy one, you have to use a cryptocurrency?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the options, at least. That's a big option. And they've started adopting crypto years ago. But.
Yeah, Pornhub was a very early adopter in accepting Bitcoin. Eros, which is an escort advertising site, was also one of the very first to start using BitPay, which is one of the biggest Bitcoin payment processors. After, I think, American Express stopped allowing credit card transactions on that site, they set it up, and then soon thereafter, Discover, Visa, and MasterCard stopped allowing payments. And so it's really one of the only ways that escorts can purchase ads online now is using Bitcoin.
I mean, I guess that leads me to ask a dumb question, which is like, what's the problem then, right? Like, what is MasterCard and Visa's loss is now, a cryptocurrency's gain, but the ecosystem continues to function, and maybe it functions better now that you're not at the behest of a company like MasterCard.
I think the issue is that a lot of cryptocurrency companies do discriminate against sex workers as well. I've had friends get their Coinbase accounts shut down, and it's also just about access. There's a lot of older sex workers, especially, who aren't super tech savvy. They don't necessarily know how to get their hands on Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. The barrier to entry is high.
Yeah.
I'm a tech reporter, and I still am learning how to use crypto. Like, it's hard to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's very complicated. It's so much easier to just be able to use a credit card, something we've been using for, decades.
I think that is something that the crypto community really needs to work on. There are a lot of sex workers, especially cam girls and other people whose work is primarily online, who have been really fast at adopting cryptocurrency for payments. But there are a lot of older sex workers, especially people who work primarily in person, who really struggle with setting up a wallet or any of these other things that are really necessary if you want to engage with cryptocurrency.
Right. So that's one of the reasons why, while it's cool that cryptocurrency is one of the many options, it's still a barrier, or in some senses, a kind of discriminatory against the profession itself to take credit cards off the table.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think I was talking with some tech CEO about this a while back when they started kicking sex workers off their site. And he told me, oh, it's the World Wide Web. You can go anywhere. If Facebook doesn't like you, if Twitter doesn't like you, you can just find some other site to hang out on. And maybe that was true in the internet of the past. There was a really vibrant ecosystem of different sites. But nowadays, there's Instagram, there's Twitter, there's Facebook, and other
two
than
of those
that,
are the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, people's options are really limited. And it's the same thing with credit cards, There's only so many ways you can pay for stuff online, and to cut even one of those off means that people's options start to get really limited.
Right. And I mean, this is something that you tell me if it's true, but like once you start shoving something into the corner and kind of marginalizing it to only one thing, taking it out of the mainstream, which is in this case using a credit card or something like that, then the possibility for abuse in whatever level becomes higher.
Yeah.
It's more out of sight. It's less part of like mainstream society, which is, fundamentally ironic because sex work and adult content has been part of civilization for as long as we know it, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that is why people are really excited about crypto for sex work. I think it has so much potential. It could be this really beautiful, decentralized technology that could give people access to things that's almost irrevocable. It holds that promise. But at the same time, that was the promise that the internet held decades ago, and that has slowly been taken away. And so a lot of sex workers I know, especially people who have been in the industry for a long time, are really cautious about putting too much trust or having too much hope about any new technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's lean into the idealism here, or to the promise, because I think like we've identified and articulated some of the difficulties of sex work in this new environment of multiple avenues and channels for doing it in. Crypto poses a possibility of like, hey, it's private, which like I think a lot of people value in this space.
Somewhat private.
Semi-private. It's, irrevocable or immutable, and never, like you can't pretend it's a $100 bill, but it's actually a $20 bill, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. So yeah, talk to me about the promise, like from your experience.
From my perspective, I was first playing around with mining Bitcoin, I think back in 2012. I read something about it in one of my dad's like engineering magazines. I was like, this is cool, like cryptocurrency, that's great. And so my friend and I set up a machine and like mined a couple Bitcoin, and we're like, okay, that's cool. Like we can't really use them for anything though, and sort of abandoned it. And then a few years later, I was living in San Francisco at the time, and crypto was just really blowing up, and people were really getting very excited about the potential that it had, especially for things that are quasi-legal. And I had just started doing sex work. I was like, oh, I remember that Bitcoin thing. And I started accepting it for payments a couple years into doing sex work, in addition to credit cards and cash. And there were a lot of people who were really excited to pay in Bitcoin.
Can I ask like a ratio? Like, are more people paying Bitcoin?
A very small percentage.
Still a small percentage.
I would get maybe 5 clients a year who wanted to pay in Bitcoin. But the people who were into it were really obsessed with it, There are a lot of Bitcoin evangelists. And it was something I preferred in some ways because there was no possibility of chargebacks, unlike with credit cards. And unlike cash, you could accept it in advance. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was this sort of happy spot between the two payment options where I could get paid before a booking, so I didn't have to worry about whether the person actually had money or not. And I also didn't have to worry about them potentially clawing it back, which unfortunately both are things you need to worry about as sex workers.
Which is to say, like, I'm going to pay with your credit card, but then after the encounter, I call my credit card company and say, like, actually, that wasn't me, or something like that.
Yeah. Thankfully, that never happened to me, but a lot of my friends experienced
I can see that as a, like, playbook page 1 for the douchebag, though.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah, and the credit card company always believes the customer.
Yeah.
Always.
Okay, so the promise from a transactional point of view is that there's security of payment. I think, a viewer might ask themselves, like, wow, I didn't actually know you could pay for sex work in person with a credit card. That's surprising to me in some senses. But more specifically, like, credit card companies are huge. And they underlie so much of our financial system from a consumer level and a retail and a wholesale level. So, like, they got to be really careful about this stuff, right? They must be, given how much is at stake for them. So, like, what kind of hoops do you have to go through to, like, effectively maybe hide from credit card companies that you're doing things that are potentially illegal if you're doing it in a place where it's illegal? What are the rules that credit card companies put out there that you have to kind of navigate through if you're going to go that route and accept that kind of payment? And I'll ask you, Liara, but of course, Sam, chime in.
As an escort, I accepted credit card payments, and I basically just lied to them about what I did. I created a shell business and had my lawyer write a fake contract for the client to sign that made it seem like I was in an entirely different industry. And of course, the client was happy to sign it too, because it covers their ass as well.
Yeah.
That was a little complicated, but I never had any issues with the payment processor. They would occasionally ask to see the contract again when I would get anything over $30,000 basically as a payment. They were like, just wanted to make sure that there was no chargeback gonna happen there. So I would just send them whatever they requested to see, and they were okay with it. When I started accepting payments for porn, I launched my own porn site, and so I set up credit card processing for that. And with that, they knew what I did because they were able to see my site. And the credit card processor that I was working with, CC Bill, they do most of the adult content credit card processing. They charge 15 to 11% just for the credit card processing.
Which is more than an average retail sale.
Absolutely. But they really hold your hand through everything. The credit card companies have extremely vague policies that they refuse to clarify. But CC Bill has been working directly with them for so long that they're able to really give you specifics. I remember I was on the phone with one of their representatives, and they were giving an example of a prior porn shoot that someone had run past them. And this girl wanted to be naked riding a horse while peeing. And she was like, can I do that? And they were like, no, you definitely can't. And she's like, well, can I be just naked on the horse? They're like, no, that's bestiality. And she was like, okay, well, can I be naked beside the horse and peeing? They're like, yeah, that's totally fine. So it's just like, I don't know how they do it exactly. I guess they just have some guru over there that's just like knows what the credit card companies are gonna freak out over, but that's how they've been able to help porn companies process payments for years.
Right.
There are new porn-specific credit card processors that pop up all the time, but typically they only last a few years before the credit card companies just shut them down. I think because they don't have that gut sense of what they'll be okay with.
Now, Sam, why are credit card companies so spooked when it comes to this kind of stuff?
I mean, it can incur really high fees for companies if they are found to be breaking those high-risk category rules. These institutions have, decades-long systems in place where they're trying to keep everything above board and legal. So things like, it's usually like, what are the categories? Like drugs, gambling, and sex work are seen as high risk. So that's at stake for them to lose money, to get in trouble. And they're trying to avoid that altogether. And a lot of this happens through the platforms themselves. So you can get kicked off of a platform for breaking their rules because they're trying to keep their rules in line with the banking institution's rules. So, there are a lot of really specific rules on a lot of these content sites that are really hard to navigate for a lot of people because there are so many of them and they're really vague. You probably have more specific examples than I can come up with, but there was a whole thing where like OnlyFans was like, you can't shoot outdoor porn. And then it was like, oh no, you can shoot outdoor, but you can't shoot it on private land. And then it was like, no, you can't shoot it on state parks. No, you can't shoot it. And it was all these like these
really
little nitpicky things. And then you try to contact their support and they're like telling everyone something different. And they're just trying to stay in good graces with the payment processors. So it all kind of trickles back down to the creator who's just trying to like make, this really harmless content. But yeah, it becomes really complicated really fast when you're trying to follow all those rules.
And those rules, the origin is that the banking institution, which could be basically the credit card company, doesn't want to run afoul of laws and thus be shut down by the government?
Not necessarily. Sometimes the content is perfectly legal, but they're concerned about a moral panic.
So that's two things. So it's basically like a real thing, which is like maybe the government cracks down, and then an imagined thing, which is a moral panic that causes a social reaction that might make the government crack down.
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah.
So that, if we're like laying the groundwork for the foundation of the financial underpinnings of the sex work industry, it all comes down to payment and who processes it and the pressures that are on them.
Yeah.
And like I'm no scholar of the Q movement, but there is a big moral panic about human trafficking.
Absolutely.
At the same time, there is human trafficking that happens, but it's blown up in other ways. So we're at the moment where there's all these different technological tools to proliferate and make sex work the creative, wonderful industry it can be. But then there are also all these pressures on the payment processors to be like, hey, let's keep this in line.
Yeah.
Like there's some, I imagine there's some like, people know that prostitution exists and sex work exists, and it's like, fine, go over there and do your thing. But once you get like a little too much, we're gonna like shove you back into the corner. It's like tolerated and allowed, but not thought of as part of like the great human experiment of living life.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's fucked up. But like, okay, so that's where we're standing as far as credit card companies, an obstacle, moral panic, an obstacle, crypto, a way out. But it's not that simple.
But I think its mere existence puts pressure on the credit card companies because...
Lost revenue.
Well, lost revenue, but also if the credit card companies don't support sex workers, they just disappear. If people can't make money online, they're just going to stop doing it. But if they're able to make money using crypto and they're still online and they're talking about how messed up it is that credit card companies won't process payments for them, that puts a lot more pressure on them. And that's what we saw with their attempts to boot creators off of OnlyFans.
The pressure of the community itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also people who support it.
Yeah.
Clients, the press, just people who see this as a reasonable issue to get mad about.
Yeah.
It was huge. It was a lot of people that were talking about sex work that I had never seen talk about it before.
Yeah.
A lot of like, it wasn't just like crypto guys. It was, it was finance reporters. It was covered everywhere in a lot of places that maybe had not engaged with sex work in a meaningful, critical way before. So it was really cool to see that.
Yeah, I've always had a group of reporters that have sort of been in my DMs and they're like, yes, we support this, but we don't know if now is the right time to talk about this. And I feel like Vice was one of the first news organizations to really be comfortable diving into sex work, obviously. But now, as it's getting more and more mainstream coverage, it's like the movement is gaining power and people realize that it's something that they can cover without fear of getting canceled or having their entire company boycotted or something. The Christians love to do that. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
So now let's shift into sort of like the culture of crypto as it relates to sex work today, because it goes everywhere from, you can use it as a basic level of payment. But then it scales up to like, big boob coin or like,
Oh, yeah.
cummies, like specific
These names.
cryptos. Yeah, specific crypto for, I can't even explain it. I don't quite understand how it works. So A, you guys have to explain that to me. But B, like, let's go through all the interactions where cryptocurrency facilitates and now maybe helps the sex industry become what it wants to be.
So there's this tension between the world of crypto and the world of sex work where crypto is very male dominated, and they're nerds, I am a nerd myself, I love them to death, but when it comes to talking to hot girls, there's often a disconnect in the ways they communicate. I think once a week I get an email in my inbox asking me to sign on to some new crypto startup for sex workers. They're like, we're gonna make NFTs for sex workers. It's gonna be great. You're gonna make so much money. And then I check out their site and I'm like, this is barely working. A lot of the people who are doing a lot of the best work in the scene, they don't necessarily know how to engage with sex workers, how to make them feel safe and comfortable. I think they are really excited about the potential of crypto. It's made them rich. It's something they feel really safe engaging in. And they don't necessarily acknowledge that sex workers have been burned by so many tech companies before, and they have to do a lot of work to build trust, to prove that they'll be around for a long time. OnlyFans even was started by someone who was running My Free Cams, which has been around for decades now. And that's why it was able to be such a success. It's not some technological marvel. The site is full of bugs, but because he had already built that trust with the community, he was able to launch this site and get a lot of people onto it very quickly. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers for crypto.
Yeah, talk to me, Sam, about that cultural tension, because it sounds to me like you have a bunch of crypto bros, sorry guys, who now are newly rich and they're like, cool, we can buy sex with crypto. That might be my most bullheaded thought of how that interaction might work, or the culture is coming together. So in covering this, like, what have you uncovered?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we talked about before, the ideology should be the same. It's people who are trying to, like fuck the system type people on both sides. But like Liara said, it's a bit of a disconnect with getting the crypto side on board with sex work as valid. It's a lot of the same ideas where like, people are in your mentions trolling, like get a real job type guys, which is just ironic to me because like they're on board with crypto, which is something that's been criticized as not being real for a long time. It's not valid. It's not gonna be a thing that catches on. And then you're criticizing someone else who's had a real job for a really long time. So yeah, it's that tension. It's also just, that's just part of the society that we're working against. It's misogynistic, it's patriarchal, it's anti-Black, anti-queer. And that, unfortunately, is kind of that Silicon Valley mindset where everyone is very, like white cis male. So yeah, there are people who are doing really amazing work in that intersection, but sex workers need the cryptocurrency community to get fully on board with sex work as work, and recognizing these issues that are happening. And some of the companies that we've talked about already, they are seeing this opportunity. They see where the money is. Like they know that it will be lucrative, but it's still it's a trickle at this point. It's not the majority, I guess. And we're gonna be seeing the same issues that we've seen with the payment processors that we've seen in the past come for crypto inevitably.
Why do you say that? Yeah, tell me about that.
It's all these, it's like we talked about before, it's the platforms that are kind of trying to work against this moral panic. We're seeing, like the IRS is kind of looking into like what's going on with crypto now, like seeing these investigations open up where people are being scrutinized for what they're doing with the crypto. So yeah, it's definitely, it's a big hope that people have that it will kind of revolutionize the freedom to move money around online. But I think inevitably we'll have to address those problems. It doesn't solve the societal problems that we've had in the past just by making it decentralized money. That still exists. Society still exists.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of ironic, right? As crypto becomes more mainstream or more people know about it, it might lose some of its creative power in places where true peer-to-peer, true unregulated kind of commerce might actually help something like sex work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what crypto technology truly survives and becomes dominant. I see already more crypto startups that are less focused on decentralization, and they're like, actually, centralizing money regulatory stuff makes a lot of sense, because then you can't have these massive scams that have happened with Ethereum and Bitcoin, where if you get enough people to gang up together, you can really mess up the system. And even I have friends who do crypto trading at quant firms, which are very highly regulated, very standardized, and they've been frustrated with trading crypto because all it takes is one person sending false information out. There's this pool of crypto traders at very established firms where one person just accidentally marked Bitcoin as being worth $0. And a bunch of people lost a ton of money because their trading algorithms suddenly exploded. And it's this tension that has always existed with the internet, where there's this really cool creative power that comes with decentralization, but at the same time, that opens the door to everything that people don't like child pornography, drugs, sex work. And obviously, some of these things I think society is becoming more okay with, like drugs and sex work. But yeah, do we want to facilitate the purchasing of child pornography with cryptocurrency? It's happening, And I think that's something that the crypto community is going to start reckoning with, and that will obviously have an effect on the relationship with sex work.
Yeah, well, thank you that's the elephant in the room, right? And I guess my question to you, Sam, I want to follow up on the volatility question and the market power of individual actors, because I think that is true. And even let's say Pornhub was like, we're only going to accept boob coin from now on. Guess who's going to buy a bunch of boob coin? Who's going to get rich from boob coin? The people who held boob coin, right? So the market power situation is something that's in flux as we speak. But to the point of the elephant in the room here is that Bitcoin and other cryptos could be used for shit that is bad, right? Child pornography. How much does that, let's separate the wheat from the chaff here. How much does that actually happen in relation to what we would say, amoralistically speaking, is consent-based materials?
Oh, I mean, the consensual material that's online is, I would say, it's overwhelmingly the majority.
Yeah.
There's way more consensual, porn happening than there is child sexual abuse material.
Well, then specifically, how much the facilitation of the commerce by crypto in a child porn scenario versus a acceptable scenario?
I think Facebook is actually the #1 facilitator of child pornography on the internet. According to statistics that I've read, most of it is happening on there, which when you think about the demographic that uses Facebook, it sort of makes sense.
Right.
And I have seen examples of people using cryptocurrency to purchase child pornography, which, people use it for anything illegal, and it does make sense as a mechanism because it is private. It's a little harder to trace. It's harder to get your bank accounts shut down for that sort of thing. And I think that is something that, while it is a very small percentage of what people are using Bitcoin for, I do think it needs to be talked about and something that the community needs to reckon with.
Yeah, it's a huge reckoning.
Yeah, and sex workers are working very closely to get that solved.
Sex workers have historically been the people who are fighting against child trafficking the most.
And building the systems that prevent it.
Backpage even was, I think, one of the top ways for the FBI to find trafficking victims because whenever they saw something that looked sketchy, they would just forward it to them. If someone looked especially young, if someone had bruises, they would just forward it to law enforcement to check out. Actually, now that Backpage is gone, a lot of people are really concerned that a lot of trafficking is going on, but now it's just more hidden.
Well, that's interesting. I think people wouldn't necessarily think that sex workers are at the front lines of fighting child pornography.
They have to
Absolutely.
be.
They have to be because
that's the weapon that people use against sex workers to get it wiped off the internet. People say
I think
that
also
for the
a
children.
lot of sex workers are just disgusted by it.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember there was this one cam girl a few years ago who filmed a video of her masturbating in front of a child's playground. And obviously that's inappropriate. And sex workers were the ones who were leading the charge, reporting her to the site, telling people about it, trying to get it taken down. Because, I mean, sex workers don't want to see it either. You know, there's this idea of sex workers being sort of laissez-faire about everything
loose
sex-related.
morals, I think would be the word.
Yeah, but most people, sex workers included, are just not down
Yeah.
with child pornography.
No one wants
whatsoever.
abuse in their own industry. I don't want to see abuse in journalism.
Yeah.
And we're the ones that speak out about it.
Yeah.
Because we're the closest to it.
Right.
And it's the same thing with any industry.
And so then let's go back to crypto for a second, because the market volatility thing is pretty interesting, right? Because if cryptocurrencies are so volatile, doesn't
Yeah.
that present a kind of a barrier for some people in the sex work industry from adopting it? Like, I want government-backed bills. I don't want like something that might go to zero tomorrow.
I think it's a question of how much capital someone has to begin with. If you're a sex worker who just doesn't really have money at all, you're going to want cash because you're going to want to buy food, you're going to want to pay for your shelter, and cash or credit cards, something in your bank account is the easiest way to do that. For sex workers who are a little more affluent, who already have savings, it's a lot easier to accept crypto because even if it takes them a week or so to transfer it from their wallet into USD, into their bank account, then that's fine because they have padding, they can pay that week's expenses. But a lot of sex workers get into the work because they don't have resources. And for them, even that week of waiting for the money is going to be devastating.
Right.
And they're going to prefer cash.
So in a sense, we've been talking about sex work in a monolithic fashion, whereas there is a wide
Absolutely.
array of economic actors with different interests. Let's get then to some of the more creative or hard to understand arenas in the intersection of crypto and sex work. I'm talking about like cummies, which in the platform is called Cum Rocket. That's what it was. And then there's like Big Boob Coin, like basically like for us, by us coin that presents a community, and you sell NFTs through it. Like it's the entire thing makes about as much sense to me as I don't know how it works. Basically, is it Cole's Cash? Basically, like you're just like paying with the money created by the business. So what is something like Cum Rocket or Cummies?
Obviously, we'll have to see how they pan out, but the emails that I've gotten from these startups and similar ones do feel vaguely like a pyramid scheme.
Okay.
I mean, a lot
That's
of
direct,
crypto
yeah.
is like that.
Yeah.
They offer you a bunch of the coin up front. They're like, you can have it. It'll go up in value if you start using it and get other creators to join. And of course, you know, you can say the same thing about USD. USD is sort of a pyramid scam. Stocks are kind of a pyramid scam. It's like, if you own a stock and more people buy into it and the price goes up, then you make money. But the difference is with Boob Coin, there's no inherent value backing it. And the US government is pretty good at paying their debt. Boob Coin, you know, it's a little more of a question mark area. Who knows? You know, there have been a lot of coins that have been started outside of the sex work industry where people raise a bunch of capital, millions of dollars even, and then disappear. And so I, for one, am very cautious about getting onto any of these platforms just because they haven't built trust with me.
And Sam, who's starting these sorts of coins? Who are the designers? Like, because I think in my fantasy land, it's like a collective of like radical feminist porn makers who are like, let's fund our own thing, and then like, let's build a community around it, and there's a coin for it. But is that the case?
I mean, I think it is in some cases. I think a lot of times it is people who believe in the cause. A lot of it is Silicon Valley tech bros, like we talked about, who see a lucrative opportunity and jump on it. I think that people like that see a market opportunity. They see desperation, frankly, people in need, and it's an easy sell. I think one thing that these startups do for the community, and you know, some people might disagree. Tell me if you disagree, but like it gets people onboarded to the idea of crypto, and into using it, and then from there, if you're like, oh, this is shit, I'm gonna go actually buy some real Bitcoin with my money instead of, you know, investing in these other coins. So I think that they're certainly not all scammy or bad. A lot of them are doing really great things, and they do have a lot of them have like a built-in community where people are already working together and teaching each other and learning how to use the thing, which is a huge part of it. There's no blanket statement about what those companies are doing. They're all very different, and it's just kind of this like wild west of like who will survive, who will actually make it.
Well, let's talk about the scammy ones for a second, because like the way that you described it sounds like a crypto pimp, like preying on desperation, buy into my coin, then all of a sudden you're dependent upon, like I guess the terms of service of how you buy in is probably pretty important as well. But then like my skeptical person hat goes on when I hear those things.
I mean, I think you could definitely call it that for sure. I think it's also capitalism.
Yeah.
You know, we could call our managers
Uber
a pimp.
Like that's even more straight up. Uber is very much taking that role with drivers.
They have people, working insane hours and peeing in bottles. Amazon. It's it's all, but we use words like pimp for sex work because that's the language that we've known in society. And it's easy to kind of label it that and say, well, that's exploitative. Whereas all work, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a different podcast, but yeah, we'll get there. Okay, but so what's some of the cool shit that's happening? Because like, I'll make an argument, which is that like, sex is a creative thing, man. Like, it's like people getting together, doing cool or weird shit with their bodies or with their minds, and like, it's a part of ourselves. Crypto is this new plaything. These platforms and blockchain is a new plaything. Like, what's the cool shit that's happening that's going great, that isn't a bunch of scammers and tech bros trying to prey upon a vulnerable population of sex workers? It's like something that's empowering in a way that you can tell a second wave feminist, like, go fuck off, like we do what we want.
Yeah. I think the second wave feminists are often pretty down with sex. I mean, it depends which one you talk to, but
I might have got my waves wrong. Maybe I'm talking about third wave, so excuse me for that.
Or maybe first wave.
Maybe a first wave, yes, exactly. So anyhow, back to the question.
It's a whole ocean.
What's the cool shit?
So I feel like I've seen people selling nudes as NFTs on like relatively mainstream platforms. And so far they haven't gotten kicked off, at least the ones I've seen. And that's really cool. I do think sex workers who are discovering how to take cryptocurrency payments on their own without it being a specific platform that is a little exploitative, designed by people who aren't in the community, I think that to me is the most exciting, powerful stuff that I've seen. People who already have their own independent porn sites who have started accepting crypto. I think Ethereum is really going to actually be something that a lot of sex workers end up using just because of the functionality. But there's a lot of cool...
What do you mean by that? I don't know what that means.
Okay, so Bitcoin, I feel like cool proof of concept for cryptocurrencies in general. Ethereum adds a lot of functionality, like the ability to do layer 2 transactions where you're not... So the mining fees for crypto are really high. And every time you do a transaction, you incur a high cost, and also they can move really slowly. But when you're developing an application that interfaces with Ethereum, but doesn't necessarily need to have an Ethereum transaction every time it runs, you can have these most of the time people have been using this for things like camming, where it's like you give a very small amount of like a secondary coin, and then like once an hour or something, it syncs back up with Ethereum and processes all of those so that everyone gets paid out or charged accordingly.
Oh, that is interesting, because that kind of takes the processing part away from a credit card company or a Coinbase or like a third-party thing.
Exactly.
And it puts
so
it
it's
in the
on
coin
chain,
itself.
and because it's Ethereum, obviously it depends how the layer 2 transactions are being done, whether it's like its own coin or not. But I feel like Ethereum is such a widely used and accepted cryptocurrency that it means that it's a lot more mainstream. And Ethereum is also implementing proof of stake, not proof of work soon. And so that counters a lot of the environmental concerns about cryptocurrency.
But I
as
mean,
well.
that's news you can use in a sense, which is to say, like, if the second order stuff on Ethereum or like coins is where the open green space for sex work might
Exactly.
be, because it proposes an automated exchange, not
Exactly.
a third-party exchange. I think I get that. I might not. Maybe people at home get it.
I
You
think-
get it. That's for sure. I don't, but we'll see.
Yeah, maybe you can have someone who's a little better at lay speak for crypto explain it. But yeah, I feel like because Ethereum doesn't necessarily have any centralized power, it's like, you can't have sex work, you can't have this or that on it. It becomes more about who is creating these ways of interfacing with Ethereum. And there are, like Coinbase, for example, lets you buy Ethereum. Coinbase is not sex worker friendly. But then there's also, that like Fox wallet. Do you know the Fox
MetaMask?
wallet thingy is called? What?
MetaMask?
MetaMask. So MetaMask, for example, is a lot more sex worker friendly because I think the way the app is set up at the moment, it can't really discriminate against sex workers. It's very open source. And so having these open source protocols that allow people to interface with Ethereum means that you can't ban sex workers as sort of like a core integral part of the functionality. And that, to me, gives sex workers a lot of leverage and power in this situation.
That's neat. I mean, when I was thinking about cool things, I was thinking about stupid shit, I guess, like a dominatrix making their sub mine. Yeah, exactly.
That happens,
Like, that happens.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know, the cultural things that might come out. Because like if I'm really into cryptocurrency, like from just a sexual preference point of view, it might kind of come into the play.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a structural technological thing, and thank you for educating me on that. That was cool. I was thinking about stuff that was a lot dumber, but maybe
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's
Still
that
cool.
thing
But
totally happens.
that's really important stuff that's happening.
Yeah. Like when I was in Vegas, Allie bought the crew lunch because she tweeted out who wants to buy us lunch. And then she was only taking cryptocurrency. So someone who has been, one of her subs for a really long time and who has followed her into this journey with crypto sent her immediately. It was like 0.5 seconds, it was half a second, sent enough money in crypto to her wallet or through SpankChain to buy lunch, to cover lunch.
And SpankChain is one of the, like,
Yeah.
what is SpankChain? I guess that's what I'm doing.
I mean, SpankChain would be one of those coins
Yeah.
that is actually, it's a lot less shady than some of these other
Yeah.
scammy ones. Not to say the others we mentioned before are scammy, but
It's a bespoke blockchain for sex work.
yeah, exactly. And they've been around probably
I think
one of the
SpankChain
longest.
is actually doing the layer 2 Ethereum
Yeah.
transactions I was talking
Oh, cool.
about before.
Yeah. So it's a platform.
Yeah,
where
the
people
way
are
their
using it.
technology works is solid based on what I read from their white page.
If the rest is
white
solid.
paper. I know they've paid sex workers for different promotional opportunities, but they don't feel like a community organization. And I'm really excited.
But that's the ideal, right? Like a community organization
Yeah.
of sex workers coming together to make a blockchain, make us, figure out how to plug that into the existing financial networks of crypto and otherwise, but then have the values
Yeah.
that you guys hope to put out
Exactly.
in the world. That's yet to come, is what I'm hearing.
Like I went over to the SpankChain LA house for a business meeting a while back, and the business
Why are you
meeting
putting
was
in quotes? Yeah.
because they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll talk about all this crypto stuff," and I was really excited. And then they were like, let's just hang out in the pool and smoke weed. And I was like, okay, we can do that. But now I just feel like you don't take me seriously at all as a business partner. And so I didn't really end up working with them because I don't want to be interfacing with a company who only sees sex workers as
Objects, sex objects?
basically, yeah, as opposed to legitimate business owners and people who, you know, maybe even educated about tech to some degree.
Imagine.
And that's, again, that culture tension between
Exactly.
what we might think of crypto culture and then someone like you. This is what I'm saying. So I'm both heartened and saddened to hear that, which is to say the best is yet to come,
Yeah.
if what I'm hearing from you, but then what's going on now isn't necessarily that. And to me, and this is something I hear a lot from the people I work with, it's like, why the fuck do you call it spank chain? Or like cum rocket? Or like these, they seem laughable on their face, and it seems like the shock value is as important as like whatever the substance is behind it. Maybe that's important for just delineating the space to play in, but it feels like it already throws it out as far as something that can be taken seriously.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the people who are doing these startups are people who are maybe Stanford alums who graduated a year or two ago. And so they're in their early 20s, you know? They're interested in working on a project called Cum Rocket or whatever. They're not seasoned professionals who actually have business experience yet. And I think that's an issue with Silicon Valley in general in some ways, is that people value that youthful culture so much and they aren't as interested in creating these really sustainable business practices.
Well, and I also think, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, like that's in translating this kind of energy and activity with sex work and crypto to the work of like feminism from the last, 100 years, 20 years, 30 years. Like when a spank chain or a cum rocket is what you can point to about it, it immediately turns off the older folks that are like, well, is this really consensual? Like, are we really talking about something that's like advancing the rights of women, like as an equal partners in the society? Or are we just, is it a bunch of people pretending to be empowered when really the structure is, as shown by something called cum rocket, forces you into their structure to make you feel, and then make you feel empowered as an illusion.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's that disconnect there with a lot of people. Whereas, the people who are holding the power to take the industry seriously are usually older, middle to upper class people. So the industry itself has a lot of growing up to do, and that's a problem. It's a major problem to kind of get that. The eyes on your product, but also be taken seriously as something that you can trust with your money. And I think that's something that clients of sex workers are also grappling with, because not only are you asking people to pay for porn, which a lot of people don't, they really should, but then asking them to then get on this new thing that has a silly name. It's hard. A lot of people don't want to do it. And it immediately, like you said, it turns a lot of people off from making that jump to begin with. So yeah, I think it's to be seen how some of these shake out. Maybe we'll see a lot of name changes as they get older. But I think the porn industry in general kind of has to deal with, we want to be taken seriously by, like you said, by these, like lifelong feminists or whoever who have these criticisms. But it can be really fun and really playful and silly, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
But it's hard to kind of strike that kind of balance and say, this isn't just like a ridiculous thing. This is actually a serious thing that could change a lot of people's material conditions.
And maybe we're not the ones at this moment, because we're so close to it, to be like, this is silly and this is not silly. Like,
it's
we'll
hard
see.
to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope that there are many crypto sex work companies that are really successful, because it's better for everyone if there's a vibrant ecosystem. I don't want there to be just one company that is successful and does it really well. Yeah, it's fine if there are multiple, and maybe some of them are cringy, but some people really like them, and then there's others that are more cool that other people like. There's there's got to be something for everyone.
In the world of what's tomorrow, like, why couldn't an individual sex worker have their own blockchain and their own coin?
I think a lot of people will be doing that. Yeah.
Because that way you're in full control
Yeah.
of the product, which is both yourself and the means of its collecting payment for it.
Sex workers are some of the most impressive people I've ever met, and they're remarkably good at figuring out new technology and ways to make it work for them. And I think sex workers are going to be some of the people at the vanguard pushing what's possible with sex work.
And crypto.
Or with crypto. Yeah.
Yes, they will be at the vanguard of pushing what's possible with sex work and crypto. Now, give me I guess I want to ask a pointed question. In your memoir that's just come out, like, does crypto play any role in the times that you write about, in the experiences that you've had?
Oh yeah, I think in the very first chapter, I talk about crypto. My book is called Whore of New York. It's a memoir about my experience in the sex industry, what brought me to it, and my thoughts about the politics surrounding everything.
And does crypto play into the politics around it?
Absolutely, and I think especially because so much of my time in sex work, I was living in the Bay Area. There's just so much interfacing with the tech community. I had a lot of clients who were running crypto startups, and so I would get to talk with them very directly about the technology, where they thought it was going, what they thought the big players would be.
Has anyone developed a crypto solution for what I think the loss of cash is both like making it rain, but also like the envelope on the bedside table, like these ideas of how one pays with cash for cool sex stuff that can happen between consenting adults. Like, it's still, there's something like fundamentally unsexy to me about like pressing a button on my phone. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, and maybe this is I'm betraying my own preferences here, but the danger of engaging in like the illicit act of prostitution or going to a strip club, or like, that's half of like what seems alluring about it.
Yeah.
So like, is there a way for crypto to incorporate that stuff too?
I think the closest thing we see to like making it rain would be like hitting the tip button or like, you know, like making it rain on someone during a cam, which is, like you said, it's still a button.
Still a button.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there are people thinking about this kind of thing already.
I've seen QR codes placed in alluring areas.
That's cool.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah.
I'm down with that, yeah.
When you said alluring areas, I know you mean like physical spaces. I'm like, what about tattoos?
Yeah, someone should do a tattoo.
Oh yeah, that's what I was imagining it like on the human body.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think so far it's usually been like very tight t-shirts, strategically placed. But yeah, people should do like body paint or tattoos or whatever else. I mean, that'll be.
But and more heady, we're talking about the intersection of like this technological layer of the world called the blockchain that we're building, and like our bodies and like the stuff that we do with them, and like what gets us into our bodies and other people's bodies.
Yeah.
Like the oldest interactions and like the newest.
Yeah, it's very cyborg.
Someone should do like an RFID implant or something where it's like when you like a contactless payment thing, but it's like you can transfer someone crypto or something.
Well, I can think of two very perfect places for that to go.
Yeah.
For it to be just a seamless interaction.
Now we're thinking.
Yeah. Got the wheels turning. Anyone who's watching it, yeah, you should.
Yeah, we're
if
just
you have
giving
the
out free
capability
ideas
of
at this
making
point.
it, just do it, please.
Right.
You know?
And then one day we'll just be like Demolition Man and we won't touch each other at all. Just the helmet's on. Okay, well, thank you guys for joining me and talking through this.
Thank you.
I hope the sexual liberation is upon us and that crypto helps.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, I think we could all use a little sexual liberation these days.